Have you heard the story about the nuclear power plant employee from Springfield who was having problems with his wife? No, we're not talking about Homer Simpson. We're talking about this guy.
911 emergency, what's emergency?
Help me! My God, my wife's breathing.
Okay, you need an ambulance?
I need everything. I need everything.
Springfield Police.
Yes, help me.
What's the problem?
I just shot this man in my house.
He's inside your house
Killed
right
my
now?
wife. He beat my wife.
Sounds legit, right? Wrong. What you heard just now was the voice of an extremely talented liar. In 1995, Mark Winger, a nuclear power plant technician in Springfield, Illinois, murdered his wife by beating her to death with a hammer. In an even darker twist to the story, he framed someone else for the murder, married their child's nanny shortly afterwards, and got away with murder for nearly 4 years. So how did he do it? Hi, and welcome to Mysterious 7. I'm Michael, and today I'm going to take you guys through another case with the most insane twists you've ever heard. In June of 1995, it seemed like life couldn't possibly get any better for Mark and Donnah Winger. The nuclear technician and his wife had been happily married for several years, and they had just adopted a newborn baby girl named Bailey. Donnah was the oldest of 3 sisters in what they described as an incredibly close-knit family. The Dreschers grew to love Mark too. He was smart, Jewish. He was attractive, and he was fun, Donnah's sister Jenny Levin told the media. Donnah just felt like she had found her person. After Mark and Donnah Winger were married in 1989, he was offered a job, and the newlyweds settled in Springfield, Illinois. We always joked about the fact when one sister marries, that husband marries 3 sisters, Levin said. We shared our lives with Mark. Donnah was working as an operating room technician and Mark was a nuclear engineer. Donnah couldn't have been happier. The only thing she would have liked to was to have a child, her stepfather, Ira Drescher, said. Donnah's mother, Sarah Jane Drescher, said her daughter was overwhelmed when she learned that she could not get pregnant. But then one day while working at the hospital, a doctor told Donnah that a teenager was looking to put her baby up for adoption. Adopting the child was an easy decision for her. She looked at me with tears when she said, "Michelle, I knew it the minute they put the baby into my arms. She had always been mine," Donnah's sister Michelle Hansen said. The Wingers welcomed baby Bailey into their home on June 1st, 1995. Donnah's family said the couple loved their new roles as parents. They seemed to have all the makings of a long and happy life together. Mark was just as excited to become a dad as Donnah was to become a mom, Hansen said. Donnah had met the woman who would eventually become her best friend, Deanne Schultz, at the hospital, and with the arrival of Bailey, the two bonded over motherhood. But then everything turned dark. In August 1995, Donnah took baby Bailey on a trip to Hollywood, Florida, to visit Donna's family. Her mother had just dropped the 2 of them off at the airport and hired a driver to pick them up in St. Louis, Missouri, and drive them back to Springfield. So after the visit, the 2 flew into St. Louis Airport and hopped in a cab driven by Roger Harrington for the 2-hour ride back to Springfield. During the course of the drive, Harrington reportedly began flirting with Donnah and talking about drugs and orgies. Detective Charlie Cox, a police officer who investigated Donna's death, later said, "This gentleman started opening up to Donnah about issues he was having. He had a voice in his head named Dom. Dom would tell him to do bad things. Recently, Dom was telling him to hurt people." After Donnah safely arrived home with Bailey, she called the transit company to make a formal complaint about Harrington's behavior, and the driver was suspended. Cox later said that the driver started flirting with Donnah, telling her he liked older women and even invited her to attend what he described as one of his sex parties. Donnah had told her family that the ride was terrifying because he was driving erratically at 75 miles per hour. After the harrowing ride, Donnah had been the victim of some strange phone calls, Weinhoff said. The family had believed that the driver had been stalking her and was a danger. Donnah called the limousine company to file a complaint, and Harrington was suspended. Mark argued his wife to write down the story in case they might need it. Police later found the note describing Donna's harrowing ride in her handwriting at the crime scene. Donnah also told Mark about the experience, and though he played a part of the supportive husband and helped her file the complaint, it turned out that he had ulterior motives for doing so. Just days later, Mark invited Harrington to their home, perhaps under the pretense of helping him get his job back. On the 29th of August 1995, The cab driver wrote Mark's name, address, and the time on a scrap of paper in his car, drove to the Wingers' home, walked inside with a coffee cup and a pack of cigarettes, and was shot twice in the head. Mark Winger then called 911 and told the dispatcher he'd just shot a man who was killing his wife. He informed police that he'd been walking on the treadmill in the basement when he heard a commotion upstairs. He grabbed his gun, went to investigate, and found Harrington swinging a hammer at Donnah. In an effort to defend his wife, he'd shot the man twice. Police arrived on the scene to find that both Donnah and Harrington still had a weak pulse. Mark was in a back bedroom, rolling back and forth in total shock. When former Springfield police detective Charlie Cox arrived at the Wingers' home, he remembered they could see the victims from the front door. Donnah was clinging to life, said Sangamon County Assistant State Attorney Steve Weinholt. She had been hit no less than 7 times in the head with a hammer. The second victim, a white man, had suffered 2 gunshot wounds to the head, but still had a pulse when police arrived, said Weinholt. It was quite chaotic, Cox said. I knew that they were probably going to be transporting the victim soon, so I wanted to try and get identification on the male suspect. Cox found the man's wallet and was able to identify him as Roger Harrington. Police recovered a bloody hammer near the 2 bodies and found Mark's .45 caliber semi-automatic handgun, a yellow mug, and a pack of cigarettes on the same dining table. They also noticed that Harrington's car had been parked against traffic, facing the wrong direction. At the crime scene, Cox said Mark was very upset and very emotional, and that he repeatedly asked who the man he'd killed was. Cox avoided identifying Harrington and tried to calm Mark down. As police combed through the scene, Mark asked police if the intruder's name was Roger. Cox confirmed that it was. Mark was shocked, and he said, "Oh my gosh, that's the man who's been harassing my wife this week," Cox said. Cox, who was familiar with Harrington after he'd lived in a trailer park owned by Cox, believed Harrington might have snapped. "I knew him as a very volatile type subject. He and his wife rented a trailer from me," Cox said. "Knowing what I knew about Mr. Harrington in the past, how quick he was to anger, I thought that very well he could have gone over there to try to get his job back. There's a hammer laying right there on the table. He picks it up and goes into a rage, then the husband shoots the bad guy." Tragically, both victims succumbed to their injuries. After learning about Donnah's previous run-in with Harrington and listening to Mark's version of events, the police closed the case within days, listing Roger Harrington as the culprit. Because once police examined the scene and listened to Mark's story, detectives concluded that he had acted in self-defense. The case was closed in about 48 hours, Weinholt said. But Harrington's family insisted from the beginning that their son was harmless. "He was no troublemaker. He was a good kid. He wouldn't even strike at anybody," his mother, Helen Harrington, said. "I don't think he would hurt anybody, and I don't think he was crazy." So it seemed like Mark Winger was going to get away with murder. Donnah's mother spoke to the media about the evening, and the family received the news of her daughter's murder. "It was 4 a.m, and I said, 'Jenny, it's Mom. Something terrible has happened,' Sarah Jane Drescher said of her call to Levin. "We sat there in my room, just crying at this unimaginable loss," Levin said. In the following months, Donnah's mother and sister took turns traveling to Illinois to help take care of Bailey. "I loved Mark because he loved Donnah, and that's what was important to me," Sarah Jane Drescher said. "But I had to be very careful because I did not want to ruin my relationship with him, because I did not want to ruin my relationship with the baby. I wanted to be a grandma, and Bailey made me a grandma." Mark was now a single father raising his infant daughter on his own. Donnah's family initially flew to Illinois to help out, but they couldn't stay, and they suggested Mark hire a nanny. In January 1996, he met 23-year-old Rebecca Simic, who was searching for a nanny job in the area. Rebecca told reporters, "It just felt like Bailey was the one that really needed me the most. She had been through so much already at the age of 3 months." Rebecca was wonderful with Bailey, and even Donnah's family agreed that she was like an angel sent to help Mark. While she felt a little uncomfortable in the house, where 2 people had died violently, she was dedicated to giving Bailey a good childhood despite the trauma of losing her mother. "I didn't want to like Rebecca, but it was hard not to like her," Levin said. "Seeing her with Bailey, there was really nothing bad we could say about her." Meanwhile, Rebecca's role at Mark's home had begun to evolve. When you live with someone and you're taking care of a child together, it's very easy to kind of play house, Rebecca said later on. Rebecca told the media that she was blown away by what the infant had been through in such a short time. Mark made me feel like I was like an angel sent to him from God or Donnah, and it was my purpose to make this family whole again, Rebecca said. She lost 2 mothers by the time she was 3 months old, and she was so smiley, Rebecca said. I wanted to get in there and say, I'm going to help and I'm going to make this little girl's life better. Mark helped Rebecca feel at ease in her new role. After a few months, the two found themselves sharing conversation and a glass of wine at the end of a long day. And then one thing led to another as their relationship turned intimate. Within the year, Rebecca was pregnant with Mark's child. The couple eloped in Hawaii in October 1996, just 14 months after Donnah's death. I remember asking him how he could move on so quickly, Rebecca later recalled, and he explained to me that when you have a good marriage, it's natural for you to just want that again. Rebecca said Mark had told her he wasn't able to have children, so she said she was very surprised when she found out she was pregnant with his child only months after moving in. Obviously, I wasn't careful. It was just kind of a shock, she said. Mark, on the other hand, was thrilled, Rebecca recalled. It felt like it was a victory to him, she said. Mark put pressure on me to marry him and have children with him. Rebecca said that Mark, who was Jewish when they met, even started going to church with her. She said he told her they could raise a family in a Christian home. I would be honored to be your husband and blessed if you were my wife, Mark wrote in a letter to Rebecca. Mark's rabbi, Michael Datz, asked him about his change in faith, and he said that Mark explained, Judaism is just too difficult and unforgiving. Rabbi Datz didn't understand, asking, Mark, I don't know what you're talking about. What do you need forgiveness for? He said Mark didn't respond. But then it seemed like Mark was trying almost a little too hard to leave the past behind. 16 months after his wife's death, Mark told Sarah Jane Drescher that he was going to sell the house where her daughter Donnah had died and buy another one just outside of town. He and Rebecca had started a family of their own, and he started cutting ties with Donnah's parents. I received a letter from Mark one day saying to me I could not be called Grandma, Sarah Jane Drescher said. I wrote him back and I begged him, please let her call me Grandma. And he said, I'm sorry, there's no way I am going to allow her to call you Grandma, and that's the way it is. Sarah said she mourned that loss for a long time. Bailey Simic, now 25, told reporters that her grandmother and grandfather, Ira Drescher, would send a birthday card to her every year. I always remember asking my mom, who's Sarah Jane and Ira, she said. My mom would always explain, like, those are Donnah's parents, and they just want to let you know that, like, they love you and that they remember you. Eventually, Mark sold the house where Donnah had died and moved with his new wife to the suburbs outside of Springfield. Things seemed great on the surface. They had 3 children together, and Rebecca raised Bailey as her daughter. Though chaotic, their lives seemed almost perfect. Mark was a loving partner and a very involved father. That would all change quite soon. One day in early 1909, when Mark was feeling ill, Rebecca took him to the emergency room in the hospital where Donnah had worked before her death. There they saw Donnah's best friend and coworker, Deanne Schultz. She seemed upset to see Mark, and Rebecca remembered that Deanne had acted strangely when she first came on Bailey's nanny, as if she were anxious to stay involved in Bailey's life. After they returned home, Mark commented that may not be the last they heard from Deanne. He was right. In February 1999, Deanne dropped a bombshell on the police, revealing that she and Mark had been having an affair before Donnah's death. She said that, at one point, he'd remarked to her that things would be easier for them if Donnah was dead. She told them that after Donna's fateful ride with Roger Harrington, Mark said that he needed to get that driver to the house. All you'd need to do is find the body, he told her. Deanne never thought Mark was serious, but when Donnah turned up dead soon after, she knew he had done it. Mark had threatened her not to tell anyone about the things he'd said, and she'd attempted suicide several times while struggling with her guilt. After seeing him in the hospital, she decided she couldn't keep quiet any longer. After hearing Deanne's story, police decided to take a closer look at the evidence from the day of the murders. The more they thought about what they'd once assumed was an open and shut case, the more questions they had. Why were there no signs of forced entry into the Winger home that August day? Why would Roger Harrington bring his cup of coffee and cigarettes into the house with him if he'd planned to attack Donnah? And why would he use the Winger's hammer as a weapon when he had a tire iron and a knife in his car? At that point, investigators came upon 3 never-before-seen Polaroid photos taken the day of the murders. They'd been with the evidence collected in a civil suit Mark had filed against the transportation company that had employed Harrington. The position of the bodies in the photos showed that Mark's version of events were not possible. Mark Winger had stated that Roger Harrington was kneeling right next to Donnah Winger's head, and he was beating her with a hammer, Weinhoft explained. He stated that he shot him and that the man fell backward so that his feet remained near Donnah's head. In reality, the Polaroid photographs show the exact opposite. Blood spatter experts agreed. Cox later told the media, "I was ashamed of the way the investigation went. I hurt Roger Harrington's family. I ran his name through hell for no reason. I mean, he was an innocent victim. It had become clear that Mark was the real murderer behind the scenes the whole time." Rebecca Simic was left to make sense of the tragedy. She had no idea what Mark was capable of, and afterward, she moved her 4 children out of Springfield to feel safer. While Mark had tried to keep Bailey away from Donnah's family, Rebecca encouraged them to be reunited. "We'd been hurt a lot by the same person," Rebecca said, "but it didn't break us." Donnah's family and Rebecca spoke to reporters about the horrific realization that Mark was a manipulative killer hiding behind the mask of a brilliant engineer and a kind, loving husband and father. In December 1999, more than 4 years after the murders, the Springfield State Journal-Register ran an article based on allegations in the civil lawsuit that Mark had arranged the murder himself and killed both his wife and Harrington. The allegations were based on a blood spatter expert hired by BART Transportation in the case after the arrest of their employee Harrington. "Everything came to a head. It changed everything," Rebecca said of the article. "I mean, it went from Mark as the hero who was defending his wife, this noble stand-up guy that every man wanted to pat on the back, to a manipulative, deviant murderer." As the detectives continued their reinvestigation, they learned that Harrington's roommate, Susan Collins, had initially told police that someone asked to meet with Harrington on the day of the murders, and that she'd seen Harrington on the phone arranging that meeting. Inside Harrington's car, they found a note written on a bank deposit slip with Mark's name, his address, and the time to be there. Roger Harrington was not an intruder, but rather he was lured into that home by Mark Winger, Weinhoft said. Deanne Schultz's cooperation with police and evidence that raised questions about Mark's story prompted the voluntary dismissal of the civil suit against BART Transportation. "I didn't see it coming," Rebecca said. "I didn't know that this whole investigation was brewing. I never thought the whole time that they thought my husband was a diabolical murderer." A warrant was issued for Mark's arrest, and he was taken into custody while at work. "I had made plans to go to McDonald's Playland," Rebecca recalled. "We were there and I got a phone call, and it was Mark's secretary, and she told me that Mark had just been arrested. I was just sick. Like my whole body kind of went numb, and I just couldn't believe it. I was shaking so badly, and I just remembered feeling so scared. I felt that I owed it to him and to my kids to just stand by him," she said. Hanson, Donna's sister, said she didn't feel relieved following Mark's arrest. "I still wanted to believe he was innocent," she said. "Here's this person that I know in handcuffs, and what's going to happen?" Bailey was just 6 years old at the time of Mark's arrest. She said no longer having her father home was scary. "I just remember everyone just trying to remain calm and kind of, at the time, being like, Dad's just going away for a while and that he'll be back soon," she said. But that was no longer possible. On August 23, 2001, Mark Winger was indicted for the murders of Donnah Winger and Roger Harrington. At the trial in May 2002, a visibly shaky Deanne testified against Mark. The court granted her immunity in exchange for her testimony, though there was no evidence linking her to anything other than keeping Mark's terrible secret. Mark was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. One of the key points the prosecution had to prove was that Harrington had gone to the house to meet with the Wingers, not to commit a murder. They presented the cigarettes and coffee mug that he'd brought inside, as well as the weapons he'd left in his car and the note with Mark's name and address. Mark's attorney argued that Harrington was mentally ill, that he behaved erratically, and that these traits indicated he was capable of murder. When prosecutors presented the Polaroid showing the position of the bodies before they were removed from the scene, Mark's attorney argued throughout the trial that first responders could have moved the bodies. "It's our belief that Roger comes to the house, he's allowed into the home, Now retired Detective Jim Graham said. There were no signs of forced entry, and he was executed at that time. Hearing the gunshot, Donnah Winger then comes from the bathroom to investigate. He then beats his wife to death with a hammer. Mark then calls 911. In the 911 call, someone can be heard moaning in the background when Mark tells the operator he can hear his baby crying and hangs up. He had told the operator there was a bullet in Harrington's head, but when police arrived, Harrington had been shot twice. Deanne also gave damning testimony at the trial, saying that Mark told her it would be easier if Donnah just died. I thought it was crazy talk, she said during her cross-examination. After a chance meeting years later, Deanne testified that she confronted Mark in the hopes of gathering information and asked him how he lived with himself, and that he'd replied that he had found Jesus Christ and was forgiven. She said he warned her that if she ever said anything, they would both be in trouble. I didn't think that anybody would believe her, Rebecca said. I just thought if Mark truly did that, she would have come forward right away. Mark's defense argued that Deanne was emotionally unstable and just a woman who had been scorned. Deanne Schultz's testimony was able to demonstrate that, in reality, Mark was obviously unhappy, unfaithful, and had specifically talked about wanting to kill his wife, Weinhoft said. Schultz was granted immunity for her testimony, he added. There was no direct evidence that directly linked Deanne to actively participating in this crime. In the end, she was such a valuable witness as it relates to presenting the motive. After a trial that lasted 3 weeks, the jury found Mark Winger guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. Rebecca said she believed he would be going home with them. After the verdict, she said the words guilty rang through her head and that she wanted the earth to open up and swallow me. Sarah Jane Drescher and her daughters, Donna's sisters, were with her when they heard the verdict. The 3 of us just embraced and cried, she said. And the story gets even more twisted, because 4 years later, Mark was also sentenced to an additional 35 years in prison when he tried to hire a hitman to kill Deanne for testifying against him. He even attempted to put out a hit against a childhood friend who had refused to pay his bail. Helen Harrington was relieved and grateful that her son had been vindicated of Donna's murder. We knew that Roger was innocent, and it finally got proven, she said. He was branded a murderer at the time, but then all this came to an end. The police also had to come to terms with the faulty initial investigation. I was ashamed of the way the investigation went, Cox said. I hurt Roger Harrington's family. I ran his name through hell for no reason. I mean, he was an innocent victim. The police department had too hastily closed the case and turned a blind eye to some red flags, and to right such a wrong, it felt great, Graham added. But Rebecca said there wasn't any closure for her or her family. When we lose someone, we gather. We have a funeral, Rebecca shared. But when someone goes to prison, well, what do? You're just kind of left with this emptiness and this hole that you can't really have closure with that. It wasn't just him being sentenced to life, she said. We were sentenced to a life of a father in prison. Bailey Simic says she missed having her father around while growing up. It was really hard being in school, seeing all the other kids have their dads and that relationship, she said. And now suddenly, I couldn't just go to my dad's room or have him pick us up from school or anything like that. Ben Simic was only a year old when his dad went to prison. I can look at the pictures and look at myself and say, that kid has no idea. He was way too young to know anything that was going on, he said. Rebecca had to move out of Springfield with her kids, and the home that she'd bought with Mark was foreclosed. She had been a stay-at-home mom for 7 years, so she had no option but to file for bankruptcy. I didn't have anything to give my kids. Everything had been taken away. All I had was love, she said. Rebecca never remarried as far as we know. She raised all 4 of the children on her own, and Bailey has since reunited with Donna's family. It was so incredible to see that there's this whole big family that loves me, and Sarah Jane still has my baby picture on her kitchen counter with all of her other grandkids, even though we've been gone for so long, she said. We'd been hurt a lot by the same person, but it didn't break us, Rebecca said. Although Sarah Jane Drescher says there will never be closure for the murder of her daughter, the family has worked together to set up Donna's Fund, which is a part of Women in Distress, an organization that works to provide shelter for women trying to escape abuse. I think her legacy will live on through people that we help, Levin said, and through the beautiful memories that we have of her. So what do you think of this crazy, twisted case of murder uncovered? Would Mark Winger still be walking scot-free today if his former lover, Deanne Schultz, hadn't developed a guilty conscience? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section. And don't forget to like, share, and hit the subscribe for more in-depth coverage of some of the most manipulative murders of all time. Stay safe, friends. Until next time.